Hi everyone, welcome back. This is part 2, looking into your peer validation as part of your action research. Now, in this video, I want to give you a couple of different things to consider when you're putting together your presentations, and then I'm going to take you through the specific questions we want you to answer. So I'm actually going to show you the template slides that we're going to use and take you through those one by one. So again, thinking about it, overall, the outcomes for this process that we're undertaking are that we're going to help each other to identify key areas within our research projects that we can develop, right? So beforehand, and particularly looking at the kind of completeness of our thinking, our justifications, looking at how action and research are working together in our projects, and trying to improve those. The other function, of course, of peer validation is that we're discussing the validity, the reasonableness of our findings. And again, we're just trying to shake those and rattle them a bit, all within the purposes of improving our overall argument. One of the things that it's going to bear reminding ourselves of then is what action research really is. If we're presenting our approach to this, well, it's good to refer back to, at its core, what action research should be about. From the McNiffen-Whitehead book, Our Core Text, action research is really about two things. Evidently, it's about action and it's about research. So it's a combination of what we do, our developmental action, how we're changing our approaches to teaching and to the rest of our practice, trying to help our students. But it's also about how we're learning about those things, how we're seeking to understand our practice more deeply, trying to explain and account for the impact that we're having in our action. So if the action is about improving our practice, the research is about creating new knowledge about practice. And that's a really fundamental thing here. We're not trying to create new knowledge about all of teaching everywhere. We're not trying to find the feedback method that's going to be perfect for everyone in every situation. What we're looking for is we're looking for very specific and localized knowledge. We're trying to find out about ourselves as practitioners with our specific students in our specific context. And I think it's useful to just be aware of that. We have a limited scope with which we're making claims about knowing, and throughout the project we do need to be balancing what we're doing with how we understand what we're doing. Now, in understanding that, in trying to account for how things have worked, how things haven't worked so well, why things go the way that they do, well, again, within research it's really useful to triangulate. So there's a lot on triangulation within research literature. One of the frameworks that we find very useful is the I, the you, and the them. So the I, quite obviously, is us as researchers. What we know from our own observations, the experiences that we have in our practice, self-assessment, analyses, all of these different things. So, although within action research we are kind of the lab rats, also thinking within the lab coat and thinking, okay, what do I know about myself? What's my perspective on this? The you is anyone that is involved in the project that you don't know, that does know the project directly. So this is students, this is peers, this is colleagues that you might have interviewed, tutors on the programme, action learning sets. In a way, peer validation is a really rigorous form of you research. So this can be direct input, this can be feedback, could be questionnaires, any sort of thing. Then finally we have the them, which is the theory. So anyone that might have something useful to say who isn't involved in the project directly. So the well-substantiated research of other academics, the wider research literature, whether it's about teaching practice, pedagogy, maybe even about research itself, again drawing on all three of these perspectives is really key. So you do need all three within the project, and you might find it a useful framework that, whenever you're showing how you're well informed, maybe planning out an action for one of your cycles, or seeking to explain, how that cycle went, what happened in a room, even to that level of detail, can you triangulate between these three perspectives in a good way? And that can really help your argument. Now, the third and final thing to consider, quite obviously, I would hope at this point, the learning outcomes for the module, right? So you might just want to have a brief recap of these, or after you've put together your presentations, just come back and see how well aligned you are, see if you're speaking to all of these. Now, Learning Outcome 1 asks you to conduct and complete an action research project, investigating an action of your practice in an ethically sound fashion. Now, by doing action research, by presenting a project where you have been acting, developing, and also researching and explaining that, this should be covered quite well. Also be aware that you'll want to, you don't have to go to town on it, but you'll want to assure your peers that you have just acted appropriately and ethically. So that's fine. Now, Learning Outcome 2 is about action again. So high quality research report, well, you haven't written that yet, but demonstrating your ability to critically self-evaluate, to work out how well you're doing in your practice, to justify the choices of the actions that you take throughout your research, that you have taken in your research, and then critically evaluating the impact of those actions as well. So, are you doing all of those things? Within the cycles, are you clear that you're well informed? You have justification? That's a good test. Learning Outcome 3, this is going back to the research. Critically discuss your own research methodology and approaches. So, including consideration of both your role as the researcher, as the practitioner, and the roles of other participants. So, your students, critical peers, other colleagues within BIM, and being able to evaluate the strengths and the weaknesses of your research and how you've designed your research. So this could look at particular methods that you've undertaken, say developing an interview. Why did you choose the interview? What was its function within your research? Have you done it effectively? What was the strengths of how you used it, the design of it? And were there some limitations? Was there a potential bias in you being present within the interview? Maybe not. How did you overcome that? So just thinking about how you've been generating, how you've been analysing and reflecting upon data to know more about your practice. And then finally, to be able to critically evaluate what impact this research has had on your own personal and or professional development. So taking a step back from the project as a whole and thinking, okay, now I've done it. At this point you won't have fully done it. You might still be in the process as you're writing up your presentations. But, with what kind of distance you have, how is this changing you as a practitioner? How is this having an impact personally or within other aspects of your life? Sounds great. So I'm not going to spend too long on this, but I do want to show you in order the particular questions we'd like you to answer in the presentation. Now, you won't be hitting all of these necessarily in the same amount of depth. By the time that you come to develop your presentation, you might not have finished the project as well. So all of that is absolutely fine, but be aware we are going to be looking at the cohesion, the completeness of this as a project. So try and answer all of the questions, try and answer them briefly, try and answer them in one slide, and again, just think about how this would fit within a short 10-minute presentation. So first up, this is just the title page, lovely. Your name, your project title, how did I improve my practice in, my ability to, blah, 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 blah. On to the first question, okay. What did I want to investigate? Really hammer out, what is this area you were looking into? Has it changed over the course of the project? Why was that important to me? How is this based on your values as a professional, as a person? Is there any particular reason why this research question, not others? How does the research that you've undertaken link to your contexts as a professional? Did you see a need with your students? Were they lacking a particular thing? Is there one kind of skill set as an educator you were looking to improve on? Maybe there was something within the institution or the particular kind of class environment that gave you a direction. Throughout the project, what has influenced you as you've undertaken it? Are there key ideas, key theories maybe, that have informed you, have underpinned the work that you've done? You might just want to account for those briefly before we actually get into the cycles, so we're aware of what you're drawing from in that discussion. Now going into cycle 1, first piece of developmental action and research. How did you actually find out what the situation was like at the outset? So, given your research question, why was that the right question to look into? How did you find out, how well you were doing? How did you do in researching other people's perspectives, the literature? Again, think about the I, the you, and the them. Well, what kind of initial data generation did you use to figure out where you were starting from? Given that, what were your options? What kind of plans did you have in mind about meaningful steps forward in your practice? What did you think you could do? And then what did you actually do? So within the context, within your classes, your practice, what were the changes of the first cycle? And why did you undertake them? What was your evidence that really shows they were going to be effective? And as you undertook that action, the research side, how were you generating evidence? What were your methods, methodology, etc., to really show what kind of impact you were going to be having? And given that evidence, evaluate, what worked well, what didn't work so well in the first cycle, strengths, weaknesses, and why was that? What do you think were the underlying reasons, the causes, perhaps link this to theory, that made things impact and work the way that they did within your first cycle? And all of that should cover the kind of main narrative of the kind of action and the research within the body of the project. So you will just go through and you repeat this for the second cycle. So again, what did you think you could do about it? What did you do and why? How are you generating evidence to show the impact as you were carrying along? Based on the evidence, what worked, what didn't? Primarily in your approach as a practitioner, but maybe also looking at the role and the agency of your students. Why was that? Why did things work? Why didn't things work so well? And again, if you've managed a third cycle, some people have, you can just go back and you can loop through that. But coming out the end into the latter half of the project and the project report, step back, look at your data, look at what's happened. What have you learned from the project? What have you learned about yourself as a practitioner? What have you learned about your students? What have you learned about teaching and teaching methods overall? Really see if you can link it in with, again, what you found from the research portion. You want to have a really strong claim, as we've talked about, to know. Great. And supporting that claim to know, how can you actually show that your conclusions are reasonable, accurate, and based on the evidence that you've generated? So you might want to link this back into specific findings and just substantiate them a bit. How have you been checking your biases as you've gone along in the project? How have you been getting outside of your own head? Maybe kind of critical conversations with a colleague, engaging in action learning sets, You know, have the tutorials or the session systems from the PG Cert been helpful in doing this? You know, how have you grounded your research as well, and those research methods potentially, to make them really tight and meaningful? Now, specifically thinking about research methods, separate question, so maybe more relevant for this, but specifically for each of the methods that you used for data generation, data analysis as well, what were the strengths and weaknesses of those approaches? So why did you pick them? What worked well? What's good about those things? And also, what were the challenges or the kind of drawbacks that you found? And then starting to step back even further from the project now, well, how have you developed personally and as a professional as a result of the actions you've taken and the learning that you've found? So what's the change for you from start to finish in the project? How has this impacted? And finally, how are you actually going to use this learning to have further positive impact? So, you know, so what are these, what are the transferable ideas? What are the next steps that you want to take to continue improving as a practitioner in the future? And then finally, just a page, dump a load of the references that you have. Again, this might be slightly redundant if you're really good at accounting for your section and what influenced you, but still it can help to just have a blanket of the references now. They don't need to be fully Harvard referenced, so just get everything down that's really been underpinning things. And that's it. That's what we're going to ask you to present as part of the validation. Of course, you'll then get 15 minutes of great discussion. You'll get some good feedback. And if you choose to, this might actually just become the final structure of your write-up. So there are a couple of different options you can use for writing up, and we'll cover those in separate videos. But a lot of people find it effective to just structure their project reports by those questions. And if you do that, from peer validation, you'll both have the structure there, but you'll also have really great pinpointed feedback at each step of the way about whether you're answering the question, you know, how deep, how well informed and substantiated your thinking is, so that you should just be able to piece all of that feedback together and get yourself a really strong first draft. So that's it for the advice in these two videos. Hope it's been helpful. I'll look forward to seeing you there. Thanks.